Okay, good evening or good early evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Ko Bragg, and I'm the managing editor of The Margin. Thank you for joining us. At The Margin, we produce investigative, data driven, and most importantly, deeply human journalism that centers experiences of frontline communities. And inside The Margin is our opportunity to continue those stories beyond publication by bringing together the people whose lived experiences and expertise shape our reporting. Tonight's conversation centers on our latest feature story, Haunted by Halong, which explores the long road to recovery after ex-Typhoon Halong devastated the Yupik villages of Kwigillingok and Kipnuk in western Alaska. This storm hit a month into the school year, and while it was downgraded from a typhoon, its effects continue to ripple through families, schools, and entire communities. So we're about to host a conversation about what recovery looks like nearly 9 months later, the mental health challenges facing young people displaced by this climate disaster, and how Indigenous knowledge continues to guide healing. I want to note at the outset that our conversation will likely veer into mention of suicide, as our story tackles as well. Um, I'm joined tonight by some incredible guests who I'll introduce, and then we'll get our conversation started. Rose Domnick is a Yupik trauma intervention specialist and founder of Calricaraq, an Indigenous-led approach to healing rooted in Yupik values and cultural practices. Biela is a school social worker with the Lower Kuskokwim School District, where he supports students and families across dozens of remote villages as they navigate trauma, displacement, and recovery. And then Katie Basile is the photographer behind Haunted by Halong. Her images document both the devastation left by the storm and the community's rebuilding in its wake. A quick housekeeping note: if you're joining us on Riverside, use the Q&A function to submit any questions throughout the conversation. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can drop your questions in the comments, and our team will bring in as many as possible during our audience Q&A. And with that, we can get started. I'd love to just go around and hear from everyone as we begin, to sort of set up, let our audience know, invite them into what the 9 months or so have been like for each of you in the work that you do, whether that's recovery efforts, supporting communities and children, centering Indigenous practices in healing, or documenting what Western Alaska has been through after Halong. So any order is fine, but just wanted to kind of start the conversation with everyone's sort of view and perspective.
Well, I guess I'll go first. I'm Jim Biela, itinerant school social worker for the school district, the Lower Kuskokwim School District. Um, it's been a rough school year since October. Um, we had several, quite a bit of changes that we had to adjust to. Um, as first responders with the school social workers, um, our main goal was to make sure everybody was settled and had the proper services that they needed, whether it's housing, clothing, mental health concerns. Um, a big part of it uh, for the kids were transporting them back into Anchorage when they were evacuated out of their villages. Some of the folks stayed in Bethel, but Bethel doesn't have enough housing. Some went to other villages, Tununik, Tuksik, Night Mute, and some other surrounding villages. Some went to our boarding school. So that was a big adjustment. Um, with the school district, we had to adjust with the school credits because of the high school. Schools are different on their categories, what they're teaching. Um, Anchorage was the biggest concern because the students there, um, primary language was Yuctan. So we had to adjust out there. Anchorage School District was great, getting folks situated and eventually bused to the proper school. LKSD, the Lower Kuskokwim School District, was able to send the teachers that were affected in the two villages. Some of them were in Bethel, some went to Anchorage to help with the students. The social work department, we had a couple of social workers sent to Anchorage to help because they knew the families and the families welcomed them. But during the school year, especially towards the end of it, um, a lot of the kids in Bethel and the villages that I have started to talk about the trauma that they were experiencing firsthand, difficulty sleeping, some fear of the wind or the rain. Um, Sadly, March 1st, we did have a suicide. And as you mentioned, we were going to talk about, mention suicide. So if anybody's aware of it, if you're in need, please call 988, the crisis line, to get the help. But this young man had died by suicide. His uncle had died prior to, I think about a week prior to the typhoon hitting. And so he had some complicated grief and then the PTSD on top of that. We're making big plans to try to adjust um, for August when school starts to address that. We don't know where the students are going to be. Some of them might have returned to their villages to help rebuild. Not sure how many are going to stay in Anchorage. So there's a lot of unknowns there. The social work department, though, will be focused on the trauma. And it's not just losing a house. They lost their village and the part of their culture. And I'm sure Rose can talk about that. The culture and the traditions that they had in the villages. So we're facing quite a bit this coming school year. I mean, we ended up pretty good and the kids started to talk about it, but that's just the surface. I mean, it's going to be ongoing now. The Uncommute, the old fish camp is gone, where some of the folks on Nelson Island, Tununic, Tuxik, Nightmute folks went because that old village was wiped out. So there's a lot of cultural traditional things that sadly disappeared this year. So I'm not sure if Rose will be able to pick up from there, but with the culture and the traditions. But um, it's been rough the past couple of months.
Thank you, Jim. My Yupik name is Kwigillingok. I was born and raised in St. Mary's on the Yukon River, not very far from where I presently live in Bethel. My English name is Rose. I have been involved since the very early 2000s and possibly maybe the very end of the 90s in trying to rebuild our traditional healing, bringing back our traditional healing wisdom and practices. And the reason why we make a really big effort in doing that is that we really believe that every culture has its own practices and ways and wisdom that guide us through grief and adversity in life. And when we can utilize those in our own culture, it helps to maintain safety, security, and contributes to well-being and really contributes to healing. So we educate about how the impacts of colonization have really severed the transmission of knowledge. And so we have multiple generations who haven't been taught to navigate through adversity in life, trauma, various kinds of harm. So we don't know what to do with the impacts of adversity, hurt, grief. We don't know how to navigate through. So the work I have been doing is really trying to disseminate what the elders have taught us about the wisdom in our culture. And so we know that the practices, the values, and the ways in our culture are much more impactful, meaningful, and help us to move away so we don't have to carry the impacts of our experiences. So we are able to provide support activities that not only bring healing, but to help to allow for our families to gain skills in taking care of themselves and learning how to move away from impacts of harm and hurt. And it's a very difficult process for us to try and embed this whole approach, or Calricaraq and Kapuyan approach, into institutions and systems, because it's like you're talking about a circle and it's really hard to put a circle into this. So understanding approaches to healing, health, well-being, and how that process takes place is very difficult for a Western mind to understand. So it makes it difficult for us to embed our practices and our ways to help our people in our communities. I know that coordination of services is very difficult because families are scattered in different places of Alaska, and it makes it difficult for transportation to be at any part of Alaska because it's so large and the expense for travel is so, it's quite hefty. I know that some of the things that have been happening, especially during the summer. Summer is a time where families engage in subsistence activities. You know, it's not an individual in a family, it's the entire family. It's generations working together and nurturing and strengthening things like belonging and connection and relationship and all of these things. And it's been really hard for families because they don't have the opportunity to engage in subsistence fishing, putting fish away, storing for the winter, because they are displaced in different anywhere else but home. So it has been difficult. Huyana.
Can I, Rose, what really surprised me, and it shouldn't have surprised me, was when the storm hit, a lot of folks lost their subsistence that they had gathered last year. But the community, even in Anchorage, for a big city like Anchorage is, the support and the extra subsistence that other people were sharing. So it wasn't just one particular, it was the whole community coming back together to support all the families that were affected by the typhoon and being displaced. And besides that, with the pictures missing, with the homes destroyed, their personal belongings, it was just amazing to see how the culture and traditions just came together and supported all those families. So I just wanted to add that to it. But your point was very meaningful because it was a whole community effort to make sure all these people that were displaced were taken care of.
Thank you both, Jim and Rose. You guys have done so much to support the region. It has been a really tough 9 months. I grew up here in the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta. Rose is my neighbor. We live in the same neighborhood here in Bethel. And I started covering climate impacts probably in 2018. And at that point, we were seeing a lot of erosion, permafrost thaw, which we're still seeing, and we called it a slow-moving disaster. And I thought about it in this, well, it's slow moving. We can still, we have time to relocate communities. We have time to, help people out. And what we saw with both Merbok, which was an ex-typhoon that hit in 2022, and then now Halong, it's not slow moving anymore. This is, this wiped out 2 communities in 12 hours. And so that's been a real shock, I think, as someone who's covered it for 7 years now, to see how quickly things can change. And it's hard because we're not ready. Both Kwigillingok and Kipnuk, the 2 villages most impacted, have voted to relocate out of those floodplain areas. There's no federal program right now in the United States to help communities relocate out of harm's way from environmental change. And so so my hope is that this coverage and this story keeps pushing that conversation forward.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, and for photographing for us. I know you and Jess collaborated on a story that talked about this, like permafrost thaw and how that's impacting impacting communities and homes. And I think, like, as someone who's based in New Orleans, where we're having an increasing number of stark conversations about the time that we have and what we think we know about what's to come. And I think particularly here in the last year, we've had a real focus after a documentarian here did a documentary about called Katrina Babies, about the kids who were born or super young during Katrina, and them feeling like they didn't have a moment where anyone turned to them to say, how was that for you? Because everyone was so focused about the immediate and vast recovery that's still not complete, particularly for Black New Orleanians, who, many of whom never returned. And so I said that to say, like, I was really grateful for Jess's work in centering young people in this, because I think, they're at a point in their lives where they're figuring this out. They're inheriting the consequences of generations of like poor planning, colonialism, all of these factors that they did not contribute to, but that are landing on them at a time where they're being tasked with figuring out who they are, where they fit into the world, disasters aside. And then a month into the school year, the worst, the unthinkable happens. And so I think I'd love to hear, Jim, if you can kind of talk to us about like and I think what you said in the beginning was really important, that like a lot of the trauma and sort of like PTSD and anxiety and things like that, sleepless nights, started showing up, maybe not in the immediate days, and probably for some, but one of the things that we highlight in the story is that it's like 6 months later, 8 months later, where everything, your nervous system is kind of setting into your new reality, and now you have this like realization of like what you've been through, or and things like that. So I'm curious about how that started showing up in classrooms and everyday life for youth who had evacuated and that you assumed care for.
Speaking on the ones that I worked with, because everybody will be different, but it was funny because for the first few months, all the help is there. Everything is all coming in very quick and it's like overwhelming with the families. So their mind is someplace else. Um, One thing about it was, I think it started to show up after, and it's going to sound funny, but it started to show up more after basketball. Basketball is big out here. We had to adjust a few things, and it was very helpful that the state allowed the folks that were someplace else join that team because of the displacement instead of waiting for the whole year and putting in all the waivers. But it kept them busy. So November, December, everything was coming in and everything, and then basketball practice started, the games started. So everybody was all focused on naturally on basketball. Um, and we got everybody situated where they had to play, and people from Anchorage were playing on their team, and we were moving people around to still have their home village team if they wanted it. Um, so that after the district basketball game in March, that's when it started to show up, because it was basically after that, they're on their own. The help wasn't, all the people that were coming in, the Red Cross and everybody was leaving. Um, the kids had more time after basketball. They weren't as busy. Um, so they had a lot more time, and they started to talk about it. The kids were talking about, come to me and say, I can't sleep at night. This is what's going on. So just let's talk about it. Let's process it. What's the fear? What's going on? Just talk about what's going on. Um, so we have a lot more education going on. Some of them don't want to talk about it um, yet. Some of the parents started to talk about, we're worried about my kids. We see this as they're not sleeping at night. They're anxious. The wind was blowing so hard, they were up all night looking out the window to make sure everything was safe. Um, Mental health services out here are limited, very limited. Um, so with our social work department, we try to put in the Western plus the cultural traditional methods with elder speaking. Rose has been great with Charlie Jaw coming out and having the elders talk. Um, and just be a source for us. Now, since it's going to go pretty close to a year now, it's going to be interesting to see how the families coped over the summer. We're still not sure who's coming from Anchorage or how that shift is going to happen. Our school department, our social work department is gearing up to look at more mental health in more traditional ways. I'm a volunteer with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and hopefully we'll be joining with the JED program, and I'll be having a Zoom meeting with them to make sure everything is what they send us with NAMI and all these other organizations, mental health. I want it more cultural, traditional, to make sure it's okay with the villages. We just don't want to go off, because some of them have lost their belongings. And hopefully they'll be more willing to talk about it when we start back up in August. So time's going to tell how much trauma the kids are going to have, and it's not going to show up right away, because all the help is there. And we still haven't even touched on folks being told only one suitcase to leave the village and leave all your pictures and all your historical belongings or things that you need or you wanted, they left behind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and particularly the color around basketball, and I'm sure the I won't say like a return to normalcy, but being able to do something important for young people, for basketball season, sports are super important, and then sort of when it's sort of in these stiller moments, then what's happening for young people. And what I know, one of the things that came up in the story was like there were quite a few young people who mentioned that like the summer in particular is not going to feel the same because they're not able to do a lot of the subsistence farming and lifeway things that they are used to doing. And so it's like, as the seasons are changing, it's like, oh, another moment where it's like, oh, I've lost this, or I can't experience, something critical to who they are. Rose, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. You shared some really great quotes with Jess, the reporter on this story, about how healing must utilize identity, culture, and wisdom to move away from impacts of historical trauma and colonization. And I think part of what the story does is sort of bring in the history of the land and how colonialism shaped it and how it's responsible for a lot of increasing disasters that we're seeing, and our lack of preparation for it. And so I'm in conversation with like the work that you do in a general sense, and also how that contributes to these storms that are increasingly difficult to navigate, and obviously are rooted in some of the same things that you bring into your practice.
One important thing that the elders have taught us is that that when we experience something traumatic, our whole being is affected. We'll never be the same person again, and that our mind, our body, our heart, and our spirit, they're impacted by the trauma, the experience, the adversity, and that that experience is going to change us without we realizing and being aware of that. And that there is a process that we need to go through to take that experience and look at it and process it so that we can understand how it affects our whole being. And so that allows us to be able to have some insight as to what we need to do to take that experience and set it in its proper place rather than carrying it. And so our elders have taught us that the first thing that we need to do in preparing our minds to be able to do that work is to first understand that our responses to an abnormal experience is normal. What human being would not be affected in such a way that every human being, no matter who we are, where we come from, our response to the experience leaves us with hurt, kind of hurt that affects our thinking, our feelings, our behavior, the choices we make, and that we need to do something with that. So when we work on healing, we do it in circles, and so the most impactful way to be able to communicate safety, to be able to communicate a normal kind of response is to be able to share your story. So I think maybe most people are familiar with narrative therapy. So when we tell our stories about our experiences, we're telling our story about what happened, how it affected us, how it made us feel, how it affected our thinking, our behavior. And we define all of that so that the listener is able to recognize in themselves and make a connection that, you know, how I have been affected, feeling lost, not knowing what to do, how I'm thinking is normal. And then listening to the story, they also are able to put some form in what they're carrying, and it contributes to being able to have words to describe what's happening within. And so once we can define what that grief looks like, what that feeling, thinking looks like through our stories, they're able to move to telling their own story. And so in helping people and providing guidance through this healing journey requires for us to have been able to work through our own experiences and to be able to heal so that we can guide another person to be able to do that. So doing that creates, it helps another human being at multiple levels, and allows for the listener to be able to connect to their story in their own way, even if our experiences are different. The important thing is that the experience leaves grief and hurt in the same way. So it's empowering the listener to be able to start moving in this process of healing and to start moving away from that. And so it also needs to include teaching coping, healthy ways of coping, and to be able to know and understand how this road pathway to healing, their healing, is going to look like. So it's all familiar. It empowers them to be able to move through this path on their own, utilizing their own resources and in their own time. And we want to make connection to elders, to people in the community who can support the individual through this journey, because we know that grandparents, parents, and other relatives love you. Your parents, your grandparents, your family love you. And the support through that process is done in that way, and our elders tell us that the most powerful form of medicine is unconditional love. And so unconditional love is expressed in patience, in generosity, in respect, in sympathy, in empathy, in compassion, in never judging, and in sharing wisdom and knowledge to ensure that your loved one is able to be okay. So we in this process, we want to be able to connect especially youth to the people who love them the most. And so that's part of the work that we do.
Thank you for that offering. I felt like I was writing down so many beautiful ways that you just captured using intergenerational and familial connections to show particularly young people the kind of unconditional love and support that they need to navigate some overlapping crises. And I want to center some of Katie's work and kind of walk through some of the images that are in the story. It was such a I'll say a couple things. One, you make my job really hard, Katie, in the sense that we cannot publish every photo that you take. Otherwise, we would have no space for any of the reporting. And it was in a story that has so much heaviness. It was really a treat to also have these images of young people just being themselves and it just added this like level of like levity and brilliance to the piece. And so I wanted to kind of look at some of those images, and if you could like kind of just share a little bit about how they came to be and sort of your work. I think one of the things that was really cool was that one of the key people in this story, Ariel Friend, is in Bethel, and her family, some of her family, and one of her siblings is like back in Kwigillingok, and they were both stripping salmon. And we got to see that in two different places. And I thought it was just like a beautiful sort of like way to kind of show like everyone is still trying to continue. And even even through displacement and all of these other questions. And so, yeah, I think we're queuing those images up, but I would love to sort of hear about just sort of how you are able to capture the essence of particularly of young people.
Yeah, thank you, Ko. I think for me, sort of documenting joy is just a really important part of my practice. It's something that I see, you know, having grown up here, I see joy and love everywhere. We have some really big challenges out here in our communities, but we also just have a lot of connection, a lot of love. You know, we just heard Rose talking about unconditional love. And that's something that I learned growing up here is just how important love and connection is to the communities and the people. And so I just think it's so important to highlight that. And in this story in particular, there's some really staggering statistics about mental health and about suicide. And I think it's so important that we read those numbers and that we read those and then we go on to improve young people's lives and see those numbers shift. But those numbers aren't, you know, necessarily the whole story. And so I think it's so important to show the joy, the love, children at play. I think when we see children playing, it's their way of showing us that life is worth living, life is worth celebrating. And it's all around. So it's not a challenging thing to photograph because you just step into it and you see it. The fish cutting. So June is just a really important time for salmon. That's when the king run is. And now we get a lot of red salmon as well. And so it was really cool to see that in Kwigillingok and then to go back to Bethel and see people, you know, all of the same family cutting fish. And so that's actually that last photo you showed of Helen Friend and her niece processing fish. They had completely lost their smokehouse and their drying rack. And then in the last few months rebuilt it. And they were ready for salmon season. And so, of course, you know, they were fortunate to be in a position to do that, but also really resourceful. And that's the family's priority is to be able to connect back to the land and water, to harvest their food and to share it. That's Helen Friend processing fish. And then back in Bethel, so like I think it was 3 days later, I was in Bethel with also with the Friend family, and you know the aunts, the elder aunts that you see, had relocated from Kipnuk and Kwigillingok, and that's Ariel in the background. And they were there had been a salmon opening that day, which means that people can fish on the river. And they brought back like 86 salmon, and they were all processing it together. And that family had also, there were some that were Bethel based before the storm, and then a lot of their family had moved in with them after the storm from those impacted villages. And so they had to quickly put this hanging rack together, move into a new house to fit everybody. And again, just, you know, resourceful and knowing that their priority was to fish, process food, connect back to the land and water, and then share. A lot of sharing going on. So it was really cool to see.
Wow. That's like really special, and I appreciate the sort of extra insight that like some of the drying racks like were like rebuilt to be able to like continue this work. I think one of my other favorite photos and moments that you captured was one of the things that Ariel was really missing was her guinea pig, Hazel. And I think you were there for the moment when her little brother was FaceTiming her and like Hazel's in the camera. And like, it was one of those things where it's like, of course, like, I don't know, that it's such a cute little moment. I just would love to hear more just about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was a really big surprise too, because I had spoken with Jess Sang, the wonderful reporter who worked on this piece, and she had been out to Quig several weeks before, and she'd met Seth, and she'd met Hazel, and she'd met Ariel and Bethel, and she told me about this guinea pig, and so I knew I had to get a picture of it. But I just landed in Quig and gotten off the plane and headed over to Seth and his family's home, and right there was the guinea pig. And like 10 minutes later, Ariel FaceTimes in to talk to the family and also to talk to Hazel, her favorite pet. So that was another like surprise. It made me think that, she must FaceTime a lot, because what are the chances that, if it's not something she's doing often, then I don't think I would have just walked in on this really sweet interaction. But yeah, Hazel the guinea pig. It was really sweet.
Yeah, it was a really nice detail that because for those of you, when you read the story, Hazel's also in the opening scene where Seth and Ariel were kind of out on like in the winds before the storm came, and when they got home, they were riding out the storm with their parents and some of their dogs and Hazel, whom we named throughout the story. And so it's one of the things that is like very tangibly that like Ariel misses about being home with her family is being able to cuddle with Hazel. And so yeah, I really appreciate those elements. I'd love to just hear just like one more beat just about what it's been like overall. I know you do a lot of really stunning and revelatory photography for us and other places about the recovery. And I just would love to hear about sort of what it's been like doing that documenting and storytelling work.
Yeah, thank you. It's been pretty overwhelming this year. Some of the first photography I did after Halong was following families from Kipnuk who are based in Anchorage now. And I've kind of followed along with them throughout the last several months. And then quickly realized that, there's folks back in both villages who are kind of working to rebuild now, a few folks in Quig and Kipnuk, and then there's a lot of people here in Bethel. And so just, I just really want to help people remember that they're there, that this storm happened, and we're going to be dealing with the after effects for years, and we can't forget. And so, yeah, I think I feel like I wish I could duplicate myself over and over again, just because I think there are so many stories to share, and I don't want anyone to be forgotten who's experienced this typhoon. And the other thing I'll say, I think about this, I see a lot of resilience, and in the climate crisis, we all have to be resilient, right? There's a lot happening. There's a lot more coming. But I also think about that word, and I think about environmental justice too. Just because communities can persevere through really terrible things doesn't mean that they should have to. We know that there's worse and worse storms. We know that the Bering Sea is warmer, and that supercharges storms. And we know that that's caused by humans burning fossil fuel. And this, that's science. And so to just expect people to be resilient over and over again when we know what's causing the issues that they're facing is just really unfair. And so that's something that I hope we all can hold as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think about it as also like the idea of like resilience is that you are pulled out of shape and then expected to spring back in, and it's like everyone is appreciating like how you are returned to form. But the other part of it is that you're constantly being stretched out of shape, out of form, and being tugged at and displaced. And then everyone is remarking on how well you endure that. And I think like that, as someone who was constantly in a state of like thinking, I mean, it's hurricane season here in New Orleans. It's now like a 6-month period essentially. So always thinking about, you know, the next plan, but also that like a lot of people don't want to be remembered for or complimented on how well they endure crises that they didn't, particularly ones that they didn't make and that we've inherited. So thanks for saying that. I could talk about that truly all day. I would love to kind of hear, you know, as we're kind of seeing if the audience has any questions, what gives you hope, what grounds you right now, as just like in the work that you do and as we approach near and nearer to the first anniversary of Halong and obviously the ensuing recovery? Like, what is the thing that gives you hope? Is there a moment that is just like, wow, this was really special to witness, or anything of the sort? That I'd love to kind of hear that from each of y'all.
I think it's the kids. They keep you going no matter, you know, bad days or good days. They're surviving. They have hope, even though they're dealing with the, you know, flashbacks and the delayed trauma that's popping up now. They all have goals that they want to get accomplished. And I think to me, what keeps me going is just when I get out to the villages where they are, um, their sense of humor, um, and their drive to keep going, and their willingness to talk. Um, and they're all strong in their traditions and their culture, even though some of it might have been lost in their home village. They lost, you know, their homes, but they also lost their land. It's not going to be the same. They're going to be able to heal, but it's still not going to be the same. But I think it's the kids. They all have hope for something, and that's really great to see.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. As we all are kind of going around, I want to put this question out that just came through the chat, which is, where do you see bright spots in how the community has come together around displaced relatives? And what do you feel are ways that we can, or people can continue to support them now and in the near future? Rose, I don't know if that helps kind of launch into what gives you hope and sort of that kind of a thing, but.
I always hope that people, no matter what age, have the courage to reach out to others, to be able to allow themselves to access support in some of the most powerful ways where healing can take place. And so traditionally, for our people, our ancestors really understood that relationships are where wellness and balance comes from, and that in these relationships, whether it's with one another, the land, the air, the environment, our creator, these are all what provides health and well-being, and that especially our young people can reach out. Our elders teach us that when we are in distress, our minds really search for something to move ourselves out of that place of distress. And it will only do what it knows or what it has learned by watching. So we do anything to remove ourselves out of that hole, that pit, because it's lonely, it's hopeless. It's a place of loneliness and hopelessness. So we, as human beings by nature, we do anything to move out of it. And so it's important for all of us to teach our children, to teach young people how to take care of themselves and to be able to navigate. And I want especially our young people to know and understand that healing takes time. There's nothing that exists that's an instant cure, an instant fix. There's nothing. But that healing takes time, and that for them to understand that we don't ever forget our experiences. We don't, it will always be here, but we can go through this process of healing so that we can take that experience and put it where it belongs. So it isn't guiding our decisions, guiding our view of what life is, but it's something that puts it, a process that puts it in its place. I want our young people to learn, understand that, and that, and I appreciate the work that Katie has done, because as part of that photography, it allows for individuals to tell their story. Once your mind looks at your experience and starts to take it out in a story form, that's when healing starts to take place. And something like photography is a wonderful way to allow for young people to be able to start telling their story. And Jim, I know you understand Calricaraq. You've seen the work done in action, and so I appreciate your incorporating components of this cultural approach and really working to get young people to talk and share. Our elders tell us that when we start to take this garbage out, it comes out. It falls on the floor. People step on it. It becomes trash. So it becomes nothing. So it's like telling our stories and sharing our thoughts and our feelings and how those drive our behavior and what it made us do. It it's healing, and you're not carrying it. And so in the circle with people that you do this with, it's like they're helping to carry that burden for you or along with you. And it doesn't seem as heavy and as hopeless and lonely. So I wish that especially our elders would remember some of the wisdom in our culture so that they could practice that and support one another in this process of healing so that we can all restore balance.
I'll just quickly say that, when I think about hope, I'll echo what Jim said. The young people give me so much hope. I see such a pride in who they are and in their culture, and that really carries me forward. And then also, Rose, you had so many incredible things to say about story and unconditional love, and so that gave me a lot of hope just now. I hope I get a transcript of this whole show so I can blow some of those up for my wall. Jim and Megan Crow and Lauren Charles, an incredible team of social workers at LKSD as well. And I think a lot of leaders have emerged through the crisis. Lucy Martin from Quig, she's using drones to help map out the new village where they want to relocate. Raina Paul from Kipnuk has done some really incredible community organizations. So there's those are kind of the silver linings, or just seeing some of these leaders emerge amidst the crisis.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, Katie, and for everyone's sort of reflections on hope, and also just throughout this conversation. I think like running the margin, we do a lot of really heavy work. Everything we focus on is about environmental justice, and therefore is about a lot of injustices that people are reckoning with. And so it's one of those things where we're like, in journalism, we're like, oh, this is such a good story, but that often means that it's about the worst thing ever. And we're just trying to crystallize that, share that, capture it, hold people accountable for how we got here. And I think similarly, like one of the things that is like a joy of this work is like getting to hold conversations like this with you all, who were really giving of your time and your energy and your expertise to bring a story like this together. And it's really my privilege to be able to like, moderate a conversation like this and just hold space with you all. In a little bit of solidarity from New Orleans as we also navigate, this what's to come, and just feeling very hopeful and full this evening. And so thank you so much. Thank you for what you've given and what you will give to your communities and to the young people that are, I'm sure, just so grateful to be in each of your presence in various capacities. That is the time we have for this iteration of Inside the Margin. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining for this really, really fulfilling discussion. Please read the story that features our lovely panelists and Katie's photography, and hope to see you for the next conversation.
Thank you so much, Ko.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.